Okay, so I'm looking at this massive stack of research you sent over about ISBNs. You're really diving deep into this one, which I absolutely love.
Well, they're one of those things you don't really think about until you need to think about them.
Exactly.
Mm.
Like, I remember one time I was trying to find a specific edition of Pride and Prejudice. You know the one I mean. The one with Colin Firth on the cover.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Well, I spent ages wandering around that bookstore like a lost puppy dog. Finally, I broke down and asked a clerk for help, and they just looked at me and said, ISBN, please.
And you were like, you mean that random string of numbers? What does that even mean?
Pretty much. I had no idea what it was or why it mattered. So for the benefit of our listeners who might have had similar bookstore experiences, let's start with the basics.
Sounds good to me.
What is an ISBN and why should we even care?
Okay, so imagine a world where every single book, no matter what language it's in, what format it's in, like paperback or hardback, or even what edition it is, has its own unique identifier. Kind of like a fingerprint.
Right? Okay, I can see where you're going with this.
That's essentially what an ISBN or International Standard Book Number does. It's a way to catalog and track books across the entire global marketplace.
So basically, it's like the book world's way of staying organized.
Exactly. Think about it from a bookstore's perspective for a second. They need a way to differentiate between the hardcover edition of the latest thriller versus the paperback edition, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it would be complete chaos.
Right. Or imagine a library trying to manage multiple copies of the same book, but in different languages. ISBNs help bring order to all of that.
Okay, so it's like a universal language for books.
Pretty much.
So let's say I decide to release a special edition of my book, maybe with bonus content or a brand new cover. Do I need a whole new ISBN for that?
You would. Any significant change to the content or format usually means you need a new ISBN.
And we're talking big changes here, not just fixing a typo, right?
Right. A minor typo wouldn't require a new ISBN, but like a revised edition with added chapters or illustrations, absolutely.
Which reminds me, we have to talk about this whole free versus paid ISBN debate.
Oh, yeah, that's always a lively discussion.
I mean, I get it. Free sounds amazing. Who doesn't love free stuff?
Especially for authors just starting out, I can see why it's so tempting.
I know, right? But then I was watching those videos you sent from Mandy Lynn, and she made that really good point about the publisher name.
Oh, right. How if you use a free ISBN from a platform like Amazon, they end up being listed as the publisher instead of you.
Exactly. And trying to fix that later on down the line seems like a nightmare.
Yeah.
You know, Mandy Lynn even had to go back and republish her very first book under a new ISBN just to sort out her branding.
Her story is a good reminder that it really pays to think long-term when it comes to ISBNs. It's kind of like choosing a domain name for your website. You don't want to get stuck with something generic or something that no one can remember just because it was free.
It's all about building a strong author platform, right?
Exactly. Especially in today's digital world where discoverability is everything.
It's so true. And that's where this whole ISBN thing starts to feel way more important. It's not just about having some random numbers on the back of your book. It's about how visible your book is in this massive digital library we call the internet.
You're hitting on a crucial point. In a world of algorithms and SEO, a well-managed ISBN strategy can make or break your book's success.
So are you saying the ISBN is like some magic code that boosts my book's ranking on Amazon? Should I be getting this tattooed on myself?
I wouldn't recommend the tattoo, but it is a key piece of metadata that's attached to your book. So whenever someone searches for a book online, whether it's on Amazon, Goodreads, or even a library catalog, the ISBN helps connect all of those data points.
Okay, I'm starting to understand. So if my ISBN situation is a mess, like I've got multiple ISBNs floating around for the same book because I was using those free ones from different platforms, that's going to confuse those algorithms.
Exactly. It fragments the information about your book. Imagine being a reader, right? You find a book that looks interesting on Amazon. You want to see what other readers thought. So you head over to Goodreads, and suddenly it's like a completely different book. It just creates confusion.
And confusion means lost readers, right?
Unfortunately, yes. And it can impact your sales ranking and make it harder for libraries to manage their collections.
Wow, okay. And here I was thinking a free ISBN was just a way to save a few bucks.
It can feel that way at first, which is why it's so important to understand the bigger picture before you hit publish.
Speaking of hidden costs, what's the deal with those barcodes? Boker charges extra for those, but I swear I've seen POD services offer them for free. Is that some kind of scam?
I can see why you'd think that.
Yeah.
But it actually highlights an important distinction between ISBNs and barcodes. The ISBN, like we've been talking about, is the unique identifier. The barcode is just a visual representation of that number, specifically designed to be read by those scanners at the checkout.
So it's like a QR code, but for books?
Exactly.
But if it's basically a free add-on from most POD services, why is Booker charging extra for it?
That's a very good question, and it's a perfect example of why authors need to be informed and do their research. Boker is a business, and like any business, they offer a range of services. The ISBN is essential, the barcode not so much, especially if your POD service already provides it.
Okay, so take their ISBN, decline the barcode upsell. Got it. This is already making me want to rethink my whole ISBN strategy.
And that's why we're doing this deep dive. Knowledge is power.
So true. We've still got a lot to cover, though, like when you need a new ISBN and that whole WWII code-breaking connection you mentioned before. But we should probably save those juicy details for after we give our listeners a moment to process all of this.
Sounds like a plan.
All right, so before the break, we're about to dive into the whole history of ISBNs. You mentioned a connection to WWII code breaking, and I have to admit, I'm really curious about that.
It's one of those things that makes you realize how interconnected everything really is. It's all in that blog post you sent from Joel Friedlander.
Right, so what's the connection?
Well, just like the Allies needed a system to decode enemy messages, the post-war book industry was having its own meltdown. Suddenly, there were all these new publications, and no one had a standardized way to keep track of them.
So it was like information overload, but for books.
Exactly. Before ISBNs came along, bookstores and libraries were stuck with these handwritten catalogs and individual tracking systems. Can you imagine the chaos?
Sounds like a logistical nightmare.
It was. Trying to manage all of those books without a standardized system, it would have been impossible.
So ISBNs were like the publishing industry's secret weapon for bringing order to the chaos.
Exactly. They swooped in and saved the day. Which brings us back to those practical scenarios we were talking about.
Right, like when you need a new ISBN, we touched upon things like new editions and formats. But what about some less obvious situations? Like, let's say my epic fantasy novel is killing it as an ebook. And then out of the blue, I get an offer from a traditional publisher. They want to release a print version complete with illustrations.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
So same story, but with some fancy new artwork. Do I need a new ISBN for that?
You would. Those illustrations, especially for a print edition, make it distinct enough to warrant a brand new ISBN.
Even though it's technically the same story.
It's all about making sure bookstores, libraries, and online retailers can easily differentiate between the different versions.
It's like those director's cut versions of movies with the extra scenes.
Exactly. It's a different viewing experience, and that needs to be reflected.
Okay, that makes sense. What about translations? If I get my book translated into Spanish, French, German, what then? New ISBN for each.
You got it. Each translation is treated as its own separate edition, and each one needs its own unique ISBN.
Because a reader in France searching for my book in French doesn't want to accidentally buy the English version.
Exactly. It seems obvious, but you'd be surprised how often those kinds of mix-ups happen, and those mix-ups lead to unhappy readers.
And bad reviews, which no author wants. But it goes beyond that, doesn't it? This is about those algorithms again. We have to make sure they understand these are different versions of the same book.
That's right. The algorithms need clear signals to avoid confusion, and ISBNs play a vital role in that.
Okay, this is all making me rethink my whole ISBN game plan. I'll be honest, at first I was all about those free ISBNs.
I think a lot of authors are when they're just starting out. It's natural to be drawn to free.
Exactly. But now I'm starting to realize just how much is at stake. It's not just about saving a few bucks up front.
Like we talked about earlier, those savings can sometimes come with hidden costs down the road.
Like Mandy Lynn having to republish her book. That must have been beyond frustrating for her.
It was a learning experience for sure, but it highlights the importance of taking that long-term view.
And being willing to adapt as you learn more, which is what this deep dive is all about, right?
Exactly. It's all about empowering authors with the knowledge they need to make informed decisions.
Absolutely. And speaking of knowledge, we still need to unpack those EAN Bookland barcodes. Those things are still a mystery to me.
Right, you were asking about those before the break. You were wondering why Boker charges extra for them when some POD services offer them for free.
Yes. What's the deal with that? Is it just a way to squeeze more money out of authors?
It's easy to see why it seems that way. But it all comes down to understanding the fundamental difference between an ISBN and a barcode. Think of the EAN Bookland barcode, which is the type of barcode used for books internationally, as like a universal translator for all of those scanners you see at the checkout counter.
I'm listening.
So the ISBN is a string of numbers, right? While the EAN Bookland barcode takes those numbers and converts them into a format those scanners can actually read and understand.
So the barcode isn't actually the ISBN, it's just a way to make the ISBN scannable.
Exactly. And while you do need a barcode to sell your book in physical bookstores, many POD services will create and add those barcodes for you as part of their printing package.
So no need to pay Bach Extra then if I'm already getting it from my POD company.
Exactly. It's all about doing your research and understanding what's included in the services you're paying for,
Hmm.
which can be tricky when you're first starting out. There are so many moving parts to this whole self-publishing thing.
It's like a giant jigsaw puzzle.
It really is, but with a little patience and a lot of research, you'll get there.
Okay, so we've spent all this time really digging into these ISBNs. We've talked about why they matter, how they work, even where they came from. But there's one thing that keeps coming back to me.
What's that?
Well, it seems like Boker is kind of calling all the shots here, in the U.S. at least.
Yeah.
When it comes to getting those ISBNs, it's their system, right?
You're right. A lot of the sources you sent mentioned that, especially that blog post by Joel Friedlander, this whole idea of Boker being the sole provider of ISBNs in the U.S. Well, it brings up some interesting questions about competition and how much control one company should have over something as important as book identification.
Exactly. Like, are we putting all of our eggs in one basket? What does that mean for authors in the long run?
It's a valid concern, and there's no easy answer. On the one hand, having that centralized system through Boker does make things more efficient. Everyone knows how it works, and it keeps the global book market running smoothly.
I can see that. But what about the other side of the coin? What happens if there's no competition?
That's the big question, isn't it? Does this monopoly drive up prices for authors? Does it stifle innovation? Could there be other, more author-centric ways to manage ISBNs? These are things we need to keep talking about.
It really highlights how much the publishing world is changing and how important it is to stay informed.
Exactly. What seems like the norm today could be totally different tomorrow.
That's why I love doing these deep dives. We start with a simple question and end up down this rabbit hole of information.
It's all about connecting the dots.
Well said. We started out completely clueless about ISBNs wandering around bookstores like lost puppies.
Now we're practically experts. We know why they matter, how to use them strategically, and even how to avoid some of those common pitfalls.
And hopefully we've inspired our listeners to do the same, to take control of their ISBN strategy and make informed decisions.
It's all about giving authors the tools they need to succeed in this ever-evolving publishing landscape.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
And for our listeners who want to learn even more about ISBNs, or maybe just brush up on their WWII code-breaking skills, we've got links to all the sources we talked about in the show notes.
Don't forget to connect with us on social media, too. We love hearing from our listeners. And who knows, maybe your questions will inspire our next deep dive.
Until next time, happy writing, everyone.